Hello and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I go by Strange Online, and today we're going to be discussing Jax from the Amazing Digital Circus. Now, I initially had this video prepared and I was going to do a whole rundown of his character, go episode by episode, but honestly, I just want to go straight into the point of making this video. I've seen a lot of discourse online about Jax's character, whether he should be redeemed, whether he is redeemable in the first place, and honestly, I wanted to touch on a point of contention that I saw a lot online and that I personally was kind of consistently coming up with. Jax is not the only character who falls into this trope, so when I speak about him, I'm speaking more generally with characters that fall into this trope. There are two tropes that I'm thinking of that I really want to discuss today, and that's the one forgive thy abuser trope, which is basically a trope where a character has to overcome their trauma and forgive their abuser in order to continue developing as a character in the story, aka Gangle with Jax. And then also the trope where a character who is abusive or manipulative kind of has their actions excused by some big portion of their life, i.e. trauma or circumstances. With that, let's get into Jax as a character. Now, when we're introduced to Jax as a character, at least in the initial episode, I wasn't really too harsh on him. To be honest, I was a little lenient on his actions and I was pretty neutral about his character. He didn't stand out to me as a character that I was particularly interested in, though I did like his design for some reason. I don't know, it's just incredibly simplistic, but I liked it. It's also low-key fun to draw, as much as I hate to say that. Either way, Jax is introduced to us as this quote-unquote funny, sarcastic guy. And honestly, this trope is not too unique, but I don't hate it. I don't hate a sarcastic guy in media. The issue that comes with Jax is in later episodes when it is pretty obvious and put on the nose that he is basically just a really mean guy, borderline abusive in some of his actions, and we see a lot of characters are conflicted with his presence as a whole. Going down the list of characters, Ragatha feels that she does not like Jax but wants to be liked by him because she feels that she is somehow responsible for the way that he is now, as we could see from the talk that she had with Kinger back in episode 6, I believe. Then we have Gangle, which is the main victim to all his crimes against humanity. We see that Gangle is outwardly kind of afraid of Jax. She does not want to interact with him. She does not want to make him angry because she feels that there is going to be repercussions that come with that. And that's honestly valid because Jax has consistently shown himself to be the type of person to put his fellow circus members through hell just for his entertainment. This is later explained away in the plot as him believing that none of the circus members are actually real people with real feelings, and because of that, he could get away with whatever he does, whether that's putting them through physical pain or just being plain mean and rude and treating them not seriously. Then we have Zubul, which is less affected by Jax but is very much not with him. Zubul knows Jax is an asshole and she is willing to tell him that again and again. We haven't really seen much interaction between Kinger and Jax. Honestly, I think he's just there and happy to be there. And then of course we have Pomni, who, because she's kind of outside of the loop since she's the newest member, has some sort of sympathy towards Jax and knows that there's something up with him beyond the way he acts, i.e. she is low-key kind of a sympathizer. I also wanted to discuss Pomni in this because I do believe that she is partially enabling Jax to behave the way he does without feeling any sort of remorse. Now, I'm not saying that Pomni is a bad character or she is doing this with a malicious intent. In the latest episode, episode 8, when they're all sitting on the couch, let me tell you my reaction when she said, "We've all done bad things." Pomni, please do not compare everyone else to this guy. I don't want to continuously hate on Jax because that's not what I'm here to do. But I am going to say this. Having bad things happen to you does not excuse being a bad person or committing bad acts. My point being in all of this, and part of the reason why I'm making this artwork today, is because I feel the concept of Jax abstracting is overlooking him as a character. I mean that the reason that a lot of people sympathize with Jax is because they know something bad is going to happen to him, or something bad has already happened to him, i.e. his trauma relating to his friends who've extracted in the circus. Now let's start with his past. We know from the context given that JAX used to have basically friends in the circus. He used to have Ribbit and he used to have Kaufmo, and we know this by the episode 7, I believe, where he's about to abstract and turns over a photo and we see all 3 of them hanging out and having a good time, right? And this is all fine and dandy. We already knew that he had some sort of past with them from episode 6, where he looks at both their doorways and kind of just avoids his gaze. JAX is obviously dealing with a lot of issues regarding how he's coping with being in the circus and how he's coping with the loss of his friends who he's felt a close connection to. Now, I personally have not seen the episode 9 leaks, and I am being very careful not to see the episode 9 leaks, so I really truly do not know what's going to happen. But my chances are that he's either going to abstract or barely escape abstraction. And I feel like a lot of fans can also agree that this is going to happen. And this buildup has also come from the fact that he's been reminiscing a lot on his past and a lot on the fact that he's in the circus and that everything here is actually real and oh my god, like he isn't just dreaming. As much as I appreciate the sort of psychology behind this coping mechanism that's built into the show, I do want to say that a lot of it is being used in the wrong way. I'm a pretty firm believer that it can be pretty hard to write a character in a bad way when a character is going through complex emotions, because the reality of human emotions is that there is no logical format to it. Some people react different ways, and most likely you'll never see 2 people reacting in a similar way or in the same way. When it comes to writing characters, I don't think it's good comparing one character to another, because one character's psyche can be completely different to another person's psyche. Reactions are based on personality and experience, and no 2 characters could exactly have the exact reality and experiences, especially considering that these characters had lives before entering the circus, meaning that JAX's life could have been completely different to his circus members. We don't know, because that's not explicitly told in the story. However, just because JAX does have potentially a different story to tell doesn't exactly excuse his behavior in the circus. JAX is a really complicated character when you start to think about all the logistic practices that have to go through his mind for him to rationalize everything that he does. I've always had a pretty solid grip on reality, so I've never experienced personally, like, thinking that something is not real when it is. And I've also never been trapped in circus. But I have had experiences in my life where I maybe don't take things as seriously as I should, or I minimize situations in order to avoid feelings that I don't want to feel in the moment. So my opinion is purely based on my own experiences in similar situations. Again, it's not as extreme, so I think that it could be fair to say that I'm not entirely 100% sure what I would do if I was in JAX's situation. I'm lucky enough to say that I have never lost somebody in my life, at least not through death, but I do understand what it feels like to lose a friend that you've grown close with. But regardless, it still doesn't excuse any of his actions. And that's why it's so important to make sure to write these characters effectively in media. But it's also about messaging. What message is being sent to the viewers who are watching The Amazing Digital Circus, watching Jack and sympathizing with him? And this isn't to say that you can't sympathize with him. I believe that you can sympathize with a character and still understand that they are not in the moral right. For example, I personally do feel bad and sympathize with JAX's situation. He seems like he's got a lot going on. However, because he has a lot going on does not mean that everybody else in the circus doesn't exist. I think it's a little bit of a mental jump to conclude that nobody exists because you want to feel better about the situation you've been put in. Sometimes I genuinely am confused on whether or not JAX really does believe that the situation he is in is not real. When he talks to Pomni about the belief that they're all falling into archetypes and that they are following a traditional role in a cartoon world, and he does the whole fourth wall break, he notes to both him and Pomni that he's at least choosing who he wants to be. But JAX's logic here is a little stifling. In order to fall into an archetype, you wouldn't necessarily have the choice of falling into that archetype if you're living in a reality that doesn't really exist. How can you say that the reality you're in isn't real and then have the free will to choose? That logic kind of falls within itself, and regardless of how he is doing emotionally, just doesn't make sense. So now that we've talked about his circumstances and his past, it's time to talk about the other trope he falls into: forgive thy abuser. Again, this trope is basically reliant on the fact that a character has to forgive their abuser in order to move on and develop as a character. Now, I did initially only mention Gangle, but I do think that Zubul kind of falls into this, even if she wasn't exactly manipulated to the extent that Gangle is. But we'll start with Gangle since she's the most obvious example in this. When we're introduced to Gangle, she's a very submissive character. She doesn't have much to say for herself, and we quickly realize Gangle in large part is that way because of JAX. Now, I'm not saying JAX is the reason that she is shy or submissive. It could be a possibility, but it's likely that that's a part of her past that was brought up within the circus. As we've seen before, she's worked in fast food and she had a lot of issues in her own life with doing what she wanted to truly do, as we saw in episode 5 when she's discussing her past of being in college and then dropping out to pursue fast food. Most likely not a choice that she did with her own wants and needs in her mind. Continuing into that, we see Gangle and JAX's dynamic as one of a push and pull, mostly from JAX's conviction. He seems to feel in power when he does these actions towards her, i.e. break her mask consistently, which is a big part of her character and something that she holds dearly to her when it breaks. In doing this, he's asserting some sort of dominance over her emotions, over her regulation, because to her belief, her comedy mask is what keeps her happy within the circus. The symbolism isn't going over my head with what her mask represents, and taking that into account, it's definitely got a lot to do with her emotional regulation and her social presence among the cast. Regardless, JAX not only consistently breaks her comedy mask, but also is always using Gangle as a running joke in his gag by throwing her into a position that she wouldn't be comfortable in, such as driving a giant truck in episode 2. I could continue giving example after example of how JAX consistently disrespects Gangle. The point is that within this trope, Gangle falls hard. In episode 8, even though JAX has quite literally doomed all the circus members, hypothetically speaking, Gangle is the first character to outwardly defend JAX, which I think just speaks a lot to the messaging in this story. Even though JAX has consistently tormented Gangle throughout the series, and Gangle wouldn't really have a reason to defend him in this situation, regardless of her own personal belief where she thinks that everybody should be there for each other, I feel like her saying it is a bit out of character and mostly put in so that the conflict of the past episode doesn't get brought up too much in the current one. Regardless though, it eliminates the fact that there should have been a conflict regarding JAX pressing the button in the hypothetical scenario, keeping them all trapped in the circus, regardless of whether it was real or not. As I previously stated, Zubul also finds herself in this trope as well. Even though Zubul isn't at the same level as Gangle when it comes to JAX's conflictions, she's not free from dealing with JAX's bullshit, and she makes it clear that most of what he tells her is bullshit. Still, in episode 7, she makes the attempt to reach out to him and basically give him advice on what he should do in the situation he has put himself in. I think Zubul does have the ability to be compassionate, but there is no reason for Zubul to be compassionate with JAX in the moment. JAX has been nothing but basically a nuisance to all the cast members, and although I've stated before there is a certain amount of sympathy that can be had with his situation, having Zubul and Gangle basically brush away the past seems like it just is serving to his development as a character rather than them. The way it's set up makes it seem like they as characters are growing, when in reality it's only being used as a ploy to minimize the past that he's created and the situation that he himself has put himself in. And I think this isn't the only show that's fallen into this trope. I think that this type of trope can be found in a lot of media, but I think it's important to talk about because the messaging is basically telling viewers that in order to become a better person, you need to forgive. And when it comes to these characters, forget. I'm of the belief that yes, forgiveness is a very good path to take, especially when you want your own mental peace. But forgiveness is earned. It's not just given because you're in a bad situation. JAX hasn't even made the effort to apologize to these characters for that trouble that he has caused them. They simply are there to excuse his actions because he's having a bad day or having a bad time in the circus. But if you look at the cast of characters, no other character is acting quite the same as JAX is. Again, they don't have the same psyche as JAX, they don't have the same past as JAX, but all of them have seen somebody abstract in the circus. All of them has dealt with being trapped in the circus. So it is kind of hard to believe that the characters are so willing to forgive his mistakes when he hasn't even tried to amend for them. In summary, do I think that JAX has the possibility of redemption in the future? Considering there's only one episode left at the length of, I believe, an hour, there is a possibility. I'd like to keep my hopes up that he somehow makes it up to the cast within that hour, but I have a very high suspicion that that's not going to happen, and instead of amending for his mistakes, the characters are just going to end up feeling bad for his abstraction or catch him in the act of abstracting and then having a moment where they're like, oh no, like how could we let this happen? I really do want to have hope, but I just don't at this point. Either way, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. It has been a long rant, so I'm so glad you guys have watched through till the end. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for future uploads. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts, and if there's any other type of topic you want me to tackle, I'll try my best in doing so. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!